The studio lights blazed hot, but nothing burned brighter than Kellyanne Conway's fury. She leaned forward, voice sharp, slicing through the panel like shattered glass. Every word she hurled was louder than the last, a desperate attempt to command the airwaves by sheer force of volume. Her eyes narrowed, her jaw tight, her finger wagging at Jasmine Crockett as if scolding a child. For Kellyanne, this was familiar. Ground-turned chaos into dominance. Scream until the truth drowns. But on the split screen, the contrast was impossible to ignore. Jasmine Crockett sat still, her posture straight, her expression measured. Did not flinch, did not frown, did not give her opponent the satisfaction of visible anger. Instead, she let Kellyanne's rage burn itself out in real time. The nation could see it. One woman unraveling, the other refusing to be shaken. Millions of viewers leaned forward in living rooms, bars, and airport lounges. Some grimaced at Kellyanne's theatrics. Others whispered, "She's losing it." The camera cut back and forth, a duel of extremes, volume against composure, noise against silence. And in that silence, Jasmine's calm was louder than any. Scream. Kellyanne pounded the desk, her words spilling into accusations, distortions, anything to rattle her opponent. Yet the louder she grew, the more dignified Jasmine appeared by contrast. It was a lesson as old as time. The more chaos shouts, the more silence speaks. Commentators in the green room whispered. Producers signaled frantically. The control room tried to cut to commercial, but America was transfixed.
Right.
What they were watching wasn't just another debate, it was a collision of two archetypes. On one side, the master of spin, unraveling under the weight of her own anger. On the other, a young congresswoman whose calm presence radiated a new kind of power. And then, as Kellyanne's tirade reached its breaking pitch, Jasmine finally raised her head. She adjusted her microphone with deliberate care, her eyes steady, her lips parting just slightly. The room fell into an anticipatory hush. Kellyanne's voice cracked mid-sentence, sensing what was coming but powerless to stop it. The entire nation seemed to hold its breath, because everyone watching knew whatever Jasmine Crockett was about to say next wasn't just going to answer an attack. It was going to make history. Asterisk, to understand why this moment mattered, you have to picture the stage on which it unfolded. This wasn't a backroom argument or a fleeting hallway exchange. It was primetime television, a live broadcast carried coast to coast. Millions were watching, millions more scrolling clips in real time. Every gesture, every word was amplified into the bloodstream of American discourse. The stakes weren't just about one heated debate, they were about who gets to define dignity in a nation tired of being divided by rage. Kellyanne Conway came armed with her familiar playbook: distort, distract, dominate. She knew that if she shouted loud enough, she could bend the narrative, make viewers doubt their own eyes, their own memories. It was the same trick she had perfected for years: create chaos. Then declare yourself the only voice that makes sense within it. In her mind, this was another chance to flex that power, to remind America she could still command attention. But across from her sat someone very different. Jasmine Crockett wasn't just defending herself. She was carrying the weight of millions who had been silenced, belittled, or told they didn't belong. She represented a new generation of leaders unapologetically proud of their roots, unwilling to cower under establishment fury. For her, this wasn't about scoring a cheap soundbite. It was about showing the country that truth doesn't need to scream in order to be heard. That's why the tension cut deeper than the exchange itself. This wasn't simply two women sparring on live TV. This was a battle of symbols.
Yes.
Screaming embodied a politics of division, loud, relentless, exhausting. Jasmine's calm reflected a different vision: steady, grounded, inclusive. One side thrived on fear, the other on faith that dignity can outlast chaos. Producers in the control booth knew they had television gold, but for viewers, it felt bigger than ratings. Social feeds lit up in real time. Why is Kellyanne so angry? Look at Jasmine calm, collected, unbothered. Hashtags began forming before the exchange even ended. It was the sense that the public was witnessing not just a clash, but a test of character. And still, Jasmine hadn't spoken. That was the part driving audiences wild. Every second of her silence stretched the suspense further. Every time she refused to interrupt, she stripped power from Kellyanne's performance. People watching felt it in their bones that Jasmine's reply, when it finally came, wouldn't just be words. It would be a verdict. That's what raised the stakes to the breaking point. This wasn't about who could yell the loudest or command the spotlight for a fleeting moment. This was about what America would remember after the cameras stopped rolling. Would people recall yet another chaotic outburst, or would they replay a calm line delivered with unshakable dignity? The country leaned in, waiting. Even Kellyanne seemed to sense she was no longer in control, her voice cracking as she tried to sustain her momentum.
Ow.
The harder she pushed, the more obvious it became this was not going to end the way she thought, because Jasmine Crockett wasn't just preparing to respond. She was preparing to redefine the conversation entirely. And when her voice finally broke the silence, it wouldn't just quiet Kellyanne, it would reverberate far beyond that studio, shaking the political world to its core. Asterisk, to understand the weight of what happened in that studio, we have to step back and trace the figure who sat on the other side of Jasmine Crockett. Because Kellyanne Conway didn't arrive on that stage by accident. She was not a background character who stumbled into the spotlight. She had been a central architect of political spin in America, someone who had shaped how millions perceived truth itself. That legacy, controversial, divisive, and built on a foundation of distortion, was sitting across from Jasmine the night that confrontation unfolded. Kellyanne's career was forged in the crucible of political combat. She rose from the world of polling and consulting, quickly learning the currency of modern politics wasn't just data or facts, it was narrative. Whoever controlled the story controlled the power, mastered the art of reframing questions, twisting language and burying inconvenient truths under mountains of talking points. By the time she became a household name, she was already the consummate strategist of spin. But her most infamous moment would also define her: the phrase, alternative facts. With those two words, she crystallized what critics had long accused her of turning lies into strategy, packaging distortion as patriotism. To some, she was clever, even brilliant in her ability to keep her allies shielded. To others, she was the face of everything corrosive about politics, proof that reality itself could be bent if one shouted loudly enough. Over the years, Kellyanne perfected her weapon: outrage. Whether sparring with reporters, battling interviewers, or dismissing critics, she knew how to overwhelm opponents with sheer noise. If someone challenged her, she attacked their motives. If the facts cornered her, she reframed them into half-truths that sowed doubt. It wasn't about winning the argument in a clean exchange. It was about leaving the audience exhausted, too drained to resist her version of events. And so by the time she sat across from Jasmine Crockett, Kellyanne believed she knew how this would go. She would dominate. She would shout, spin, accuse, interrupt, and flood the conversation until Jasmine was either silenced or dragged into a shouting match. It was a script she had performed countless times before, against opponents seasoned and green alike. But there was a shadow side to this strategy, one she had never quite acknowledged. Noise eventually loses its edge. The louder she grew over the years, the more Americans grew weary of it. What once seemed sharp began to feel predictable. What once commanded attention began to draw eye rolls. By the time she squared off against Jasmine, Kellyanne was carrying not just her reputation, but the fatigue of a nation tired of constant outrage. Her personal contradictions didn't help. She portrayed herself as a champion of family values, yet her own household often contradicted her public positions. She presented herself as a voice of reason, yet her interviews were remembered more for deflections than clarity. In the public imagination, she became less a truth-teller than a professional stormloud, relentless and ultimately hollow. This was the baggage she brought into the studio. To her, it was another chance to prove she still had it, to remind America that Kellyanne Conway could dominate a headline. But to the millions watching, she symbolized something else entirely. She was the embodiment of a politics built on volume, a politics that shouted over dignity, that prized winning the clip over honoring the truth. And that night, she launched into Jasmine Crockett with all the tools she had perfected over decades. Kellyanne believed she was doing what she always did best, command the room. Yet she didn't realize the contrast was exposing her. Every shout, every finger jab, every smirk didn't weaken Jasmine, it weakened Kellyanne. The louder she grew, the more transparent the act became. Viewers weren't mesmerized anymore. They were exhausted. Because here's the truth. Kellyanne Conway's power was always rooted in controlling the stage. But what happens when the stage fights back not with equal volume, but with an unshakable calm that makes rage look ridiculous? That was the confrontation unfolding before the nation. The seasoned strategist of noise facing a woman who refused to play by those rules. For Kellyanne, it was supposed to be just another performance. For Jasmine, it was the moment to quietly dismantle everything Kellyanne had built. And what happened? Next would show America that even the loudest storm eventually runs out of thunder. Asterisk before Jasmine Crockett leaned into her microphone on that fateful night. She carried with her a lifetime of experiences that had forged her calm into something unshakable. To understand why her reply carried such power, you need to know where she came from. The story of a woman who had been underestimated, overlooked, and written off, yet who rose with quiet determination to speak for those too often silenced. Jasmine Crockett's journey did not begin in the polished halls of Congress or the bright glare of television studios. It began in the working-class neighborhoods where she learned what resilience really meant. Raised in Texas, she grew up in a world where justice wasn't guaranteed and dignity was something people had to fight for every single day. From an early age, she saw how communities of color bore the brunt of broken systems, how immigrants struggled to carve out belonging, how ordinary families lived with strength despite hardship. Those lessons planted seeds that would later bloom into her life's work. She chose law not as a career of prestige, but as a calling. Jasmine became a public defender, standing beside clients who had no one else to fight for them. She walked into courtrooms where people were judged not for their character, but for their skin color, their accent, their lack of wealth. Case after case, she learned how to navigate systems designed to overwhelm, and how to do so without losing her own composure. That courtroom training would become her sharpest weapon, the ability to keep steady while others unraveled. But Jasmine wasn't content to stop at defending individuals. She saw the larger injustices and decided to step into politics, not because it was glamorous, but because it was necessary. She won her seat in Congress by speaking unapologetically about equity, justice, and the dignity of every American. She made enemies among those who thrived on division. She also built deep trust among those who saw in her a reflection of their own struggles and hopes. And yet, with every step forward, she carried the weight of doubters. Some dismissed her as too young, too brash, too unwilling to play by the unwritten rules of political decorum. Others tried to pigeonhole her, reducing her accomplishments to sound bites or stereotypes. But Jasmine had long since learned that calm persistence outlasts doubt. Every barrier she broke down, every attack she endured, only sharpened her sense of purpose. That's why. When she sat across from Kellyanne Conway in that television studio, she wasn't just another guest. She was a woman who had walked through storms before. She had heard louder voices, faced sharper attacks, stood in tougher courtrooms. Kellyanne's rage wasn't new to her. It was familiar. And familiarity breeds strength. For Jasmine.com was not passivity. It was a weapon honed through years of defending those without a voice. She understood the power of waiting for the right moment, of letting noise expose itself before delivering the line that cut through everything. Her silence on that stage was not weakness, it was preparation. Every second she sat still, she was letting Kellyanne write her own downfall. And beyond the studio, Jasmine represented something larger. She was the face of a rising generation of leaders, progressive, diverse, unapologetically proud of identity and heritage. For young women, for immigrants, for people of color, she embodied the possibility that dignity and composure could carry the day against even the most seasoned purveyors of spin. Her calm was not just personal, it was cultural. It told America, we don't have to shout to be powerful. We don't have to mirror rage to defeat it. We can stand, steady, and proud, and win. As the cameras rolled, those who knew Jasmine's story recognized it instantly. This was not luck. This was preparation meeting its moment. Her life had trained her for this very confrontation. Where others would have cracked under the glare, she sat taller. Where others might have met scream with scream, she waited. She knew that sometimes the greatest power lies not in the first word spoken, but in the last. So as Kellyanne Conway's voice grew, hoarse with fury, Jasmine Crockett finally adjusted her microphone. Her eyes were clear, her breathing even. She carried not just her own composure, but the weight of countless people who had taught her what it meant to endure and still stand tall. The silence ended, the air thick with anticipation, and at that precise moment, everyone watching sensed the balance of power shifting. Jasmine Crockett wasn't just about to respond. She was about to deliver the line that her entire journey had prepared her for. Asterisk. The clash didn't erupt all at once. It built like a storm rolling in, each wave of words heavier than the last. Kellyanne Conway leaned into her strategy, volume rising, tone sharpening, as if sheer force could substitute for substance. She jabbed her finger across the table, interrupting, dismissing, sneering at Jasmine Crockett as though belief itself was proof of superiority. To Kellyanne, this was familiar theater. Keep the opponent on defense. Force them into the mud. Make the spectacle itself the victory. But Jasmine refused to play along. She sat with her hands clasped, posture steady, her eyes fixed not on Kellyanne's jabs, but on the bigger picture. Each insult hurled her way rolled off like water on stone. The more Kellyanne lunged, the more obvious the imbalance became. This wasn't a debate between equals, it was chaos straining against calm, fury crashing against a wall of composure. Producers backstage whispered nervously. They knew television gold when they saw it, but even they could sense this wasn't an ordinary segment. The tension was thick enough to cut, the kind of moment that could veer into disaster or history. Viewers at home gripped their remotes but didn't dare change the channel. Something electric was happening. Kellyanne's insults grew sharper. She mocked Jasmine's experience, tried to twist her record, even dipped into personal jabs meant to rattle. Her voice hit a near scream, desperate to pierce Jasmine's armor. You don't know what you're talking about, she barked, pounding the desk for emphasis. The noise was overwhelming, meant to suffocate, to trap Jasmine into lashing out. But Jasmine didn't flinch. Instead, she let the noise fill the room until it began to sound hollow. She tilted her head slightly, as if studying Kellyanne, the way a lawyer studies a hostile witness, letting them unravel in front of the jury. Every second of Jasmine's restraint amplified the contrast. Kellyanne looked frantic. Jasmine looked unshakable, and audiences noticed. Social feeds buzzed with live commentary. Why is Conway losing it? Crockett hasn't even spoken and she's already winning. The drama wasn't just in what was being said, but in what wasn't. Silence had become the sharpest weapon on that stage. Kellyanne, sensing the tide slipping, grew more desperate. She spoke over the moderator, over the panelists, even over herself, tumbling into contradictions. What had begun as a confident assault was now unraveling into incoherence. Her fury no longer looked powerful, it looked panicked, and then it happened. Jasmine leaned forward, placing her hand gently on the desk, adjusting her microphone with deliberate care. The studio, once filled with noise, fell suddenly quiet. Even Kellyanne Midrant seemed to hesitate, as if realizing too late that she had spent every ounce of energy. Jasmine's eyes locked forward, not on Kellyanne, but on the millions watching beyond the camera lens. Her voice hadn't yet emerged, but already the dynamic had shifted. Viewers knew instinctively, the calm before. The reply was more powerful than all the shouting that came before. The moderator froze, sensing the weight of the moment. Kellyanne, lips pursed, leaned back just slightly, as if bracing. And Jasmine inhaled slowly, preparing to speak not just to the room, but to the nation itself. The escalation was over. The silence had spoken. And now Jasmine's first words would decide everything. Asterisk, the pause seemed endless, though in reality it lasted no more than a breath. Cameras zoomed closer, catching the glint in Jasmine Crockett's eyes as she finally leaned into her microphone. The studio air was thick, the kind of silence that makes hearts pound, that makes every viewer lean forward in expectation. Kellyanne Conway had dominated the past several minutes with noise. But now, all that remained was anticipation for Jasmine's reply, and then it came. Asterisk, her voice was steady, low but clear, cutting through the leftover static of Kellyanne's tirade like a bell tolling in the night. She didn't shout. She didn't match rage with rage. Instead, she spoke with the kind of measured precision that carries more weight than the loudest scream. "Kellyanne," she began, her tone almost disarmingly calm, "I don't need to yell to make the truth heard. The facts are louder than your shouting, and the people of this country deserve better than theatrics." The words landed with force. Not because they were complicated, but because they were undeniable. In that single sentence, Jasmine framed the entire confrontation. Dignity against chaos, substance against spectacle. Kellyanne blinked, her expression flickering, unsure how to counter silence wrapped in truth. Jasmine didn't stop there. Continued, her rhythm deliberate, her pauses intentional, drawing the audience in with every phrase. "When you scream at me, you're not just screaming at me. You're screaming at every woman who has had to sit in meetings and endure condescension instead of respect. You're screaming at every immigrant family who's been told they don't belong here. You're screaming at every young person who wants leaders to argue less and deliver more." The studio murmured. Even the moderator leaned back, eyes widening. What Jasmine was doing wasn't just answering an attack, she was reframing the battlefield. Kellyanne's rage no longer seemed like dominance. It looked like a tantrum. Jasmine's calm no longer looked like restraint. It radiated as authority. Kellyanne tried to interject, but Jasmine raised her hand ever so slightly, not in dismissal, but in control. The gesture was powerful enough to silence the attempt. And Jasmine pressed on. "You've made a career out of noise. You call it strategy, you call it spin. But let's call it what it really is. Distraction. And tonight I'm not here to play along. I'm here to remind the American people that leadership isn't about who can scream the loudest. It's about who can stand the tallest when the room is at its noisiest." That was the line. The one that broke the internet. The one that was clipped, captioned, and shared across every platform within minutes. Leadership isn't about who can scream the loudest, it's about who can stand the tallest. Viewers at home erupted. Phones lit up with text messages. Social media feeds ignited like wildfire. In living rooms across the country, people sat up straight, nodding, cheering. They weren't just watching a debate, they were witnessing a viral moment that distilled their frustrations and their hopes into one unforgettable sentence. Jasmine let the words hang in the air, her silence after the line amplifying its resonance. Kellyanne shifted in her seat, visibly rattled. For once, the master of spin had no script, no ready-made line to pull her out. The noise that had always been her weapon now looked flimsy against Jasmine's composure, and Jasmine knew it. She didn't gloat, didn't smirk. Instead, she leaned in further, delivering the finishing touch with quiet conviction. America doesn't need another voice tearing us apart. We need voices lifting us higher. So if you think screaming will make me shrink, think again. My silence wasn't weakness, it was patience. And my words, unlike your noise, will last. Long after this broadcast ends, the room broke. Gasps, murmurs, a few scattered claps from the audience who couldn't help themselves despite studio rules. Even the control booth, usually stone-faced professionals, let out audible reactions. Twitter hashtags exploded. Hashtag stand tall. Hashtag.com over chaos. Hashtag Crockett mic drop. TikTok loops replayed the line with dramatic music. Commentators rushed to type, "This is the moment." Kellyanne tried to recover, forcing a smile, throwing out a half-hearted retort about liberal talking points. But it was too late. The momentum had shifted entirely. Every word out of her mouth now sounded like background noise to the sentence. That would live on. And the brilliance of Jasmine's counterattack wasn't just the line itself, It was how she delivered it. No theatrics, no raised voice, just calm clarity, amplified by the chaos that had come before. She turned Kellyanne screaming into the perfect setup for her own quiet thunder. The viral nature of the moment wasn't manufactured. It was inevitable. Because what Jasmine had done tapped into something deeper than politics. She had voiced the exhaustion of a nation tired of shouting matches, tired of endless division, tired of rage drowning out reason. She offered an alternative, a model of power rooted not in fury, but in composure. Clips spread faster than the networks could replay them. Headlines began to draft themselves. Jasmine Crockett silences Kellyanne Conway with one line. The calm heard around the country. Memes paired Jasmine's quote with images of storms giving way to sunlight. For a public that craved validation, Jasmine had given them language. She had given them a phrase to repeat, to post, to tattoo on their feeds as proof that dignity still wins. And sitting there under the lights, Jasmine didn't need to bask in it. She simply leaned back, folded her hands, and let the storm she had just calmed rage outside the studio. She had said enough. The line would do the rest. Kellyanne's fury had been designed to break her down. Instead, it had set the stage for Jasmine to rise higher. That was the irony and the poetry. The very noise meant to bury her became the amplifier of her triumph. But what happened inside that studio was only the beginning. Because as the broadcast ended and the cameras cut, the real shockwaves were just beginning to ripple outward. The internet, the headlines, the talk shows America wasn't finished with this moment. In fact, it was about to become bigger than anyone could have imagined. Asterisk, the broadcast ended. But the story was only beginning. Within minutes, clips of JasmineCrockett's.com takedowns spread across social media like wildfire. The line leadership isn't about who can scream the loudest, it's about who can stand the tallest, was clipped, subtitled, remixed, and shared on every platform. By the time the studio lights dimmed, millions had already seen it. By dawn, tens of millions more would dot Twitter. Ever the first responder to viral moments erupted. Hashtags trended simultaneously. Hashtag stand tall, hashtag.com over chaos, hashtag Crockett mic drop. Commentators, activists, and everyday citizens piled in with praise. This is how you handle bullies, one tweet read, racking up tens of thousands of likes in an hour. Another user wrote, Jasmine Crockett just gave us all a masterclass in dignity. The reactions weren't just about a good debate moment, they were about validation. People felt seen, defended, uplifted. TikTok took it to another level. Young creators spliced Jasmine's words over cinematic music, turning her line into motivational edits. Students recorded themselves repeating her phrase before heading into classrooms. Workers played it in the background as they typed, nodding along. It wasn't just political junkies reacting. It was regular people who felt the sting of being shouted down in their own lives and saw Jasmine as their mirror. On Instagram, the quote was everywhere. Graphic designers rushed to post stylized versions of her words, superimposed over powerful images of women standing tall. Immigrants waving flags, protesters marching in unity. Within hours, Jasmine's line wasn't just a soundbite, it was a mantra. Mainstream media had no choice but to follow. Morning shows replayed the clip with wide-eyed anchors marveling at the composure she showed. Late-night hosts wove jokes around Kellyanne Conway's unraveling, contrasting it with Jasmine's steady poise. Editorial boards ran pieces titled, The Power of Calm, framing the moment as a cultural reset in how America understood leadership. Politicians weighed in too. Progressive leaders amplified the clip, praising Jasmine for modeling what they called true servant leadership. Even some centrists, weary of partisan theatrics, admitted her poise cut through the noise in a way America desperately needed. Of course, Kellyanne's defenders tried to spin it, calling the moment staged, accusing Jasmine of dodging substance, but their efforts rang hollow. The visual contrast was too undeniable. The more they tried to reframe it, the more viral Jasmine's calm became. And perhaps the most telling reactions weren't from politicians or media, but from ordinary people. A mother wrote, My daughter watched Jasmine last night and said, That's how I want to be when people yell at me. A teacher shared that her class opened the day by talking about Crockett's line. connecting it to lessons about civil rights leaders who chose calm over chaos. Across the country, people who normally tuned politics out were suddenly tuning in because this moment wasn't just politics. It was human. Meanwhile, Kellyanne Conway faced the opposite current. Clips of her screaming circulated alongside. Jasmine's calm silence, the contrast made starker with every replay. Memes mocked her outburst. Commentators noted that she looked rattled, out of touch, a relic of an old playbook that no longer works. For someone who built a career on controlling narratives, she had become the unwilling face of losing control. Asterisk, the irony was rich. Kellyanne's strategy had always been to dominate through chaos, but this time the chaos boomeranged. What she thought would be another victorious performance had instead exposed her weaknesses, her exhaustion, her reliance on noise. And America wasn't buying it anymore. Asterisk, as the hours turned into days. Jasmine Crockett's line solidified itself in the cultural lexicon. It appeared on t-shirts, posters, and coffee mugs almost overnight. Protest organizers began quoting it. At rallies, influencers worked it into captions. College students cited it in speeches. The phrase was no longer hers alone, belonged to everyone who had ever chosen composure in the face of arrogance. Asterisk. The shockwaves were undeniable. What started as a tense studio clash had become a national moment of clarity. For once, the viral clip wasn't about a gaffe, a scandal, or a mistake. It was about dignity triumphing in real time. And yet the power of the moment wasn't just in its virality, it was in what it revealed. A hunger across America for leaders who could rise above the noise. People weren't just celebrating Jasmine Crockett, they were expressing something deeper, something that had been building for years, because behind the memes and headlines lay a profound truth. America was tired of rage as politics, and Jasmine's calm had given them a glimpse of another way forward. Asterisk. The viral storm could have easily been the end of the story. Another flash of outrage, another round of memes, another week in America's endless cycle of political noise. But Jasmine Crockett's reply resonated differently. It didn't just linger in the feeds, it lingered in the soul. Because what the nation had witnessed wasn't simply a takedown. It was a demonstration, a reminder, a lesson in what leadership truly looks like when stripped of theatrics. In that studio, under blinding lights and hostile energy, Jasmine had modeled something too often absent from politics. Restraint as strength, composure as power, calm as a weapon sharper than any insult. And in the days that followed, that truth became undeniable. Commentators called it a new blueprint for politics. Faith leaders echoed it from pulpits, connecting Jasmine's posture to the timeless tradition of choosing dignity over degradation. Civil rights historians invoke Dr. King's words that true power lies in meeting hate, not with more hate, but with unshakable resolve. Suddenly the clip was being taught not just as entertainment, but as a case study in moral clarity. For Jasmine, this wasn't about a viral line or personal spotlight. It was about embodying the values she had carried. Her whole life, resilience, patience, and the understanding that calm doesn't mean weakness, it means mastery. She knew the traps of political theater, the raised voice, the pointed finger, the attempt to provoke. And she knew that falling into them only gave the aggressor what they wanted. Her choice to remain steady was more than instinct. It was intentional, and that intention became the moral at the center of it all. Dignity is not passive. Dignity is active. It doesn't mean ignoring arrogance, it means confronting it without surrendering your soul. It doesn't mean silence, it means speaking in a way that cannot be drowned out. Because it isn't carried on volume, but on truth. The contrast was almost biblical. On one side, noise, arrogance, fury. On the other, poise, clarity, resolve. It was David and Goliath retold not through a slingshot, but through composure. And the victory was just as decisive. Audiences recognized themselves in that moment. Because who hasn't faced a Kellyanne in their own life? A boss who belittles, a peer who shouts, a neighbor who sneers. And who hasn't longed for the ability to answer not with equal venom, but with quiet strength that leaves the aggressor Exposed? Jasmine Crockett gave millions that image proof it could be done, proof it could work. The moral was as much about America as it was about one debate. Our politics has been consumed by the belief that louder is stronger, that chaos is strategy, that dominance is leadership.
But
Jasmine's moment reminded people that true leadership doesn't need volume, it needs vision. And vision is clearest when the noise falls silent. The beauty of that lesson was in its simplicity. Anyone, anywhere, could carry it. A student in a classroom, a worker in a boardroom, mother defending her child, citizen facing injustice. You don't have to scream to be heard. Sometimes the calmest voice in the room is the loudest one of all. That was the real victory. The transformation of a political clash into a universal truth. And it's why the clip refused to fade, because it wasn't just about Kellyanne Conway versus Jasmine Crockett. It was about arrogance versus dignity, chaos versus calm, the past versus the future. And in that face-off, dignity won. But what made the moment unforgettable wasn't only the victory itself, it was the sense that something larger had shifted. That America, weary of rage and division, had finally been shown another path. Not through utopian fantasy, but through a single, undeniable display of composure under fire. The lesson was etched in the hearts of millions. Arrogance burns itself out. Dignity endures, and as the nation replayed Jasmine's words, shared her quote, and wore it across their chests, one question lingered in the air. A question that carried this story from a viral clip to a cultural turning point. If one woman's calm could silence chaos on live TV, what else might dignity accomplish if we all chose it together? Asterisk, this story began with a scream, a voice raised in anger, a display meant to dominate, to belittle, to remind the audience who thought they owned the stage. But it ended with something far more powerful. Silence filled with dignity. A calm reply that traveled further than any insult ever could. Kellyanne Conway came armed with arrogance. But Jasmine Crockett left with something she never expected America's: respect. Because in that split second, Jasmine proved what so many have forgotten. True strength isn't in how loud you speak, but in how firmly you stand. And now, the choice isn't just hers. It's ours. What kind of nation do we want to be? One that rewards arrogance, or one that lifts up dignity? One that drowns in noise, or one that finds power in clarity? One that allows division to rule, or one that sees in Jasmine's moment a path forward for us all? If you believe in dignity over disrespect, in calm over chaos, in leaders who inspire rather than intimidate, then this is your movement too. Share this story. Spread it wider. Let it be a reminder in every classroom, every home, every workplace, that dignity can turn even the loudest storm into silence. Subscribe. Stay with us. And join a community that refuses to let arrogance define our future. Because together, we can amplify what Kellyanne could never shout down: the quiet, unshakable truth that dignity will always outlast noise. Jasmine's moment wasn't just hers. It was a mirror held up to America. And if we choose to carry it, if we choose to live it, then dignity will not just survive these times. It will lead us through them.